I come from Peru, a small and underdeveloped piece of land in Latin America. In the long and short, the history of my country can be defined by his corruption and lies, especially the part of the lies. This reality was most prominent between 1990s and the 2000s during the government of Alberto Fujimori, who had gained the trust of the Peruvian people by taking command in the years of terror, during the fight against terrorism that had left the country on the verge of collapse in the 80s. At the same time, he managed to keep the economy under control, because back then a copy of Anthem was more valuable than our coin. He had an entire legacy ahead of him as one of the rarest things in Latin American politics, being a decent president. Not magnificent, not brilliant, just decent. And he looked at that legacy and said,
"You know what? It'd be kinda cool if I became a dictator, right?"
Yeah. So he did that. One of his first and probably most important targets was the media. He bribed representatives of the most influential TV networks of the time, ensuring that only news and reports favorable to his regime were broadcasted. And he also did this to maintain control over explicit content. This part is really important. These men gave us fear and lies, and we smiled, because at last we were free. Free from corruption, free from lies, free from explicit content. Now let's talk about CollectiveShout. Likely, members of the Latin American community haven't heard about CollectiveShout, and that's understandable. Right now, this group's most recent actions are more of a European problem than a Latin American one, but they do have the potential to become a global issue. But why is that the case, and more importantly, what is CollectiveShout? In short, they are an Australian feminist activist group that has been operating since 2009. Their main objective is to fight against the sexualization of women in the media, and this of course includes advertising, books, art, and video games. For example, let's suppose they perceive that certain content is harmful or sexist towards the integrity of women. In that case, they raise their voice against it, and this has led to the shutdown of initiatives, products, and even toys that sexualize women, especially minors. In fact, among their most recent actions is their move against the proliferation and sale of childlike sex dolls in various websites, including Amazon. Not only that, but they also have taken direct action against pornographic advertising in public and virtual spaces like Twitter and Spotify. And you might think,
hey, that doesn't sound so bad.
Well, the point is, no, it doesn't sound bad. The core idea of the movement is good and is driven by a noble intention, aiming to change a reality that is very common amongst women. Honestly, it's not really a novelty to say that yes, many industries do exploit and sexualize women, especially within artistic fields. Hollywood! Faced with these situations, it is completely natural for many people, both women and men, to raise their voices against these problems and seek a better future, one that doesn't treat women as objects. So, just to be clear, the core idea behind CollectiveShout existence, it's not inherently bad, and they have a very real reason to act. Some people refer to organizations similar to CollectiveShout as toxic feminism, and while that reaction may be understandable, just remember this. Toxic feminism is not justifiable, but it is explainable. It's a sad but predictable response to a much broader and older problem: misogyny. And if we want this to change, we first need to understand it. But yeah, CollectiveShout is plagued with toxic feminism and hypocrites, so yeah. No bueno. So, even though CollectiveShout has noble goals and intentions, its approach to achieving those goals leaves a lot to be desired, if I'm being sincere. But well, you know what they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So now let's see how they paved that road. The problems began in April 2025 when CollectiveShout sent a very angry letter to the payment processors of Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Paysafe, Discover, and others. The request: the payment processors must cut funding to video game websites that made profits through the sale of adult games and games with explicit content. Ha, what a funny word. But where did the letter come from and what motivated its development. Because adult games are not something new and they have been in the market for a while now. So what happened? Well, what happened was a video game titled No Mercy developed by Seraph Games. I won't go too much into detail about the content of this game because, to be honest, it is simply disgusting and deplorable. In short, it was nothing but an abuse simulator. The trailers and the game's premise were so repulsive that even members of the gaming community look at it with very little steam, even considering it to be a product that shouldn't exist. CollectiveShout heard about the news and began closely monitoring the situation, and what they discovered was not something they liked. It also didn't help that the developers themselves describe it as a simulator of non-consensual sexual activities. This further ruined the image of the studio behind this abomination of an idea, and they ended up removing the product from Steam and other digital marketplaces. Not to mention that Canada and Australia completely banned the sale of the game due to this alarming content. We don't intend to fight the whole world, and specifically, we don't want to cause any problems to Steam and Valve, is what Seraph Games said in a statement pointing on No Mercy's Steam page. But hold on, what does this have to do anything with Visa, MasterCard and all those other payment services? Alright, this is what we call a domino effect. You see, first Seraph Games develops this trash and presents it to the market, where digital platforms like Steam look at the product and give it the green light for sale, since they already offer multiple titles with adult content. However, Steam didn't anticipate that this game was so depraved that the entire countries didn't even wanted it. CollectiveShout discovers the project and doesn't like it, so they send a letter to the world's main payment processors demanding that they pressure digital marketplaces to delete the title. Visa and MasterCard say okay and pressure Steam and other gaming sites to remove No Mercy. So in the end, only this game was removed and nothing bad ever happened afterwards. You see, that's what I would say if we live in a rational world. But the reality is that the block wasn't only applied to No Mercy, as I mentioned earlier. This block was applied to all adult games on the platform that literally had nothing to do with the controversy and had been on Steam for years, yet still they ended up being removed from Steam European servers. The initial responses were mixed. On one hand, some people felt relieved by the removal of adult games, saying that it was a good idea and only a bunch of perverts will complain. Which, yes, it's kinda valid. On the other hand, some expressed concern about how abrupt the change was and how sudden the deletion of all these titles had been. Not only that, but they were also surprised by the disproportionate influence that all these payment processors have on what we consume. And then they were the perverts that were crying because they could no longer play their hentai. But this was only the beginning, and it wasn't the first time that CollectiveShout had applied pressure against a video game. And I need you to pay attention to this case because I think it perfectly illustrates the flaws this movement has. And this case was about Detroit Become Human, another title that CollectiveShout tried to strangle in its early stages, claiming that the game encouraged violence against women and children. Acts of violence and exploitation against women are indeed shown in the game, but not for erotic or sexual reasons, but rather as a narrative tool that helps us understand the game's world's context. Furthermore, this violence is not exclusive to women, it is extended to all types of androids, whether male or female. Besides, how are we supposed to understand the seriousness of the problem inside of the game if we never see the problem? How am I supposed to actually familiarize myself with the androids and feel pity for them if I never see them struggle, if I never see how humans abuse the androids? And those scenes of violence against Kara and Alice, key female characters inside of the game, not only serve as an introduction to the android struggles, but also as a representation of a much real and everyday issue that real women suffer. So you want to stand up against violence towards women, but you don't want to talk about it? It makes no sense. This case perfectly highlights CollectiveShout's biggest weakness, its generalization of everything. You can't lump together a game that openly admits to being a simulator of physical abuse with another about robots learning how to feel emotions. Like, Jesus Christ, I can bet you 2 nickels on a Colt McRib that they don't even know what the game is about. I can guarantee you they don't even bother to actually play Detroit Become Human. They simply saw those 2 scenes about Kara and Alice and decided, oh, this game must hate women because this game has violence against women. So let's just ignore all the context that this game has and let's just focus all our attentions in these 2 particular scenes that without the context that all the game provides, then yes, this is just pointless violence. And from my point of view and the evidence that is stacking up, that is the same mistake they're making right now with No Mercy. Instead of just focusing on the problem that is No Mercy, which is a game that openly admits to be just a simulator of abuse against women, they simply decided, oh, this game abuses women, so every single game that has adult content must also abuse women. Instead of just closing this game that openly admits it, let's also involve all the other games that quite literally had nothing to do with this issue. They censored No Mercy, a game that deserved to be questioned, but ultimately expanded that restriction to the rest of the games that shared the same genre, even though they had nothing to do with this controversy at all and had been on Steam for years. How is this fair to both the creator and the consumer? But it doesn't matter to CollectiveShout, because these games had explicit content, and everything that has explicit content needs to be permanently banned. That is the way of thinking of CollectiveShout. But what exactly is explicit content? I think we need to start asking that question more often, because this is no longer about just protecting women and children, this is about censorship. You see, this concern about the influence and censorship carried out by CollectiveShout is not new. In fact, Anna Valens, a journalist from Vice, had been conducting investigations on the impact that CollectiveShout had on the media. But in the end, she resigned. And it wasn't just her, multiple colleagues also reported editorial pressure and censorship. Her resignation took place after Anna was notified that Vice owner Savage Ventures demanded the immediate removal of all articles related to CollectiveShout. What? A group of people seeking to silence those who question their ideological agendas and refuse to listen any kind of information and evidence that contradicts their insane ideals? Holy moly, guacamole! I have for sure never heard of anything like that before in my entire life. Obviously, the journalistic community and social media was not really happy, nor was the general public. This led to multiple publications beginning to question the foundations of CollectiveShout's movement, and they started noticing cases that were a bit strange, especially related those to female characters in video games such as Tomb Raider, Halo, Detroit Become Human, and a ton of anime. And in many cases, these character claims make absolutely no sense at all. Let's take Cortana for example, one of the most iconic female characters in video game history, belonging to the Halo franchise. And according to CollectiveShout, this character is a hypersexualized representation of the female gender. What? Once again, did these people even bother looking into the product that they want to censor? Did they take a moment to look at Halo's history or understand what kind of game it is? Because according to these ridiculous statements, the answer seems to be no. Cortana is one of the most charismatic, important characters in all of Halo, not to mention that at no point in any of the series' many titles is she portrayed in a sexualized manner, nor is she involved in any explicit scene. Cortana is quite literally the representation of female strength inside of Halo. The same could be said about Lara Croft, another character they attempted to censor, despite literally representing female strength and capabilities of actually making a difference in adventure games. From many people's perspective, CollectiveShout simply targets whatever they dislike without knowing its history or creative process, and they decide to censor it despite lacking any basis for doing so. And worst of all, CollectiveShout are complete hypocrites. And this isn't even a matter of personal opinion, this is solid evidence of the duality of this activist group, because the same group that supposedly defends the honor and integrity of women, especially children, it also defends and praises Cuties, a movie that openly sexualizes women and minors. If you are a woman in a video game that is not even real, then you deserve hell. But if you're a movie that openly puts cameras up children's ass dancing in really tight suits, then you are a really powerful message against the sexual exploitation of minors. And I will say it again in case you didn't hear. CollectiveShout, the same organization that cried over a video game about androids learning to be human, praised a movie that placed cameras uncomfortably close to the private areas of young girls while they dance obscenely in tight outfits in front of God knows how many people. This group of supposed feminists has no problem censoring games and journalists, yet calls cuties a powerful protest against sexual exploitation of minors. How is this acceptable or coherent? And other content creators have also taken the light upon this, such as Savvy, who highlighted this hypocrisy and exposed the incoherent viewpoints held by the women of this group. One of the most fascinating examples was Renee K. Chopin, who at first harshly criticized cuties, and this is reflected in tweets she made a month before joining CollectiveShout. According to her LinkedIn, she joined in September 2020, and the posts criticizing cuties were from August, only to her stance to change and make a complete 180-degree turn after she joined the activist group. Now, is this an extraordinary case of someone who voluntarily changed their opinion due to personal reflection? Or did she simply change her mindset because she had to follow the ideological agenda of her new Girl Scout troop? I have a slight suspicion it might be the latter. And this isn't an isolated behavior from a single member, it's the entire organization, including Melinda Tonkar, director and co-founder of CollectiveShout. And yes, she also openly defended cuties. But another key point, and I think this is the most concerning, is the influence that CollectiveShout has over payment processors such as Visa. Because shortly after the activist group sent the letter I showed at the beginning of this video, the pressure was almost instantaneous. 385 games erased in 72 hours to be exact within the Anglo-Saxon European market. The question now is, are more heads going to roll? These acts of censorship, pressure, and fake integrity are not about women's safety. CollectiveShout can delude itself into believing that their core principles are their purpose to actions, that they are just as noble as their ideas, but the truth is, this isn't the case. This is about money. A lot of money. About $500,000 in donations to be exact. A number completely alien to any other activist movement. But what made my eyebrows rise even higher was the fact that CollectiveShout also has the designation of deductible gift recipient. This means that any donations they receive is tax deductible according to the DGR Item 1, which is an Australian law. But what exactly does that mean? Very easy. Imagine there is an organization that does good things to help people, like actually does good things. The Australian government gave them a special sticker called DGR Item 1. That sticker means this: if someone gives them money to help, they can pay fewer taxes later. It's like the government saying, thanks for donating, as a reward I let you pay a little less. And that's it, definitely something that cannot be abused by people with ridiculous purchasing power and money. Oh wait. But leaving aside for a moment this suspicious and unusual case of annual income averaging $500,000 Australian dollars, let's forget all of that for a moment and let's listen together to the spectacular Melinda Tonkar raised, the face and voice of CollectiveShout, who has an abandoned website with the most horrendous UI in the universe, where she describes herself in the third person. And she has a ridiculous amount of links to her famous YouTube channel with no profile picture, which hasn't been updated in 4 years and has the abysmal total of 22 subscribers. My channel, which isn't even a year old, has more subscribers and views than she does. Just to put into perspective. Not to mention the beautiful links to CollectiveShout's official channel, which has the spectacular spectacular total of 940 subscribers despite being active since 2010. Its most viewed video is from 2 years ago. This gigantic Australian activist group, which literally no one on earth has ever heard of before the No Mercy case, somehow, through divine intervention, they managed to raise $500,000 a year, thanks to their countless followers who give them donations that make up to 95% of their income. Definitely nothing suspicious going on here. Another thing that caught my attention is who are they to determine what you can and cannot watch or consume? Who are they to decide what women can or cannot buy? What is explicit content for them? Yes, No Mercy was an extreme. It deserved to be stopped, but there are other games, other 385 games that were deleted from the digital platform without even a warning. And yes, they were adult games, yes, they were pornographic games, but you see, here's the small detail. You decide if you want to buy it for you. These games don't even jump into your face or appear directly into your recommendations. You can literally activate the filters if you want to see adult games in your Steam directive. The problem is not the adult games. It's the limits of CollectiveShout's censorship and how themselves define what counts as explicit content. What will happen when they decide GTA is explicit content, or Baldur's Gate, or Dragon Age, or Mass Effect, or Halo, or Wolfenstein, and more and more and more? But yeah, why should I care, am I right? First they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was no socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was no trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was no Jew. But then they came from me, and by then there was no one left to speak for me. Why? Because everyone was now free. Free of corruption, free of lies, free of explicit content. Thank you for watching.